Good afternoon. I hope your weekend is lovely. My name is Kai Audi. My pronouns are they, them. And welcome to the very first episode of Facts, a podcast where we'll be addressing frequently asked questions about gender and non binary persons by giving you facts that hopefully will help clear any misinformation you may have. I'll hand over to my colleague to introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Alexia Kagendo, and my pronouns are they, them. Welcome.
Okay, I guess we'll get right into it. So we hear this term non-binary, especially I feel this year when certain people who are in the public came out as non-binary.
Yeah.
So when was the first time that you as Kagendo came across that term?
Wow. That was, I think I've been thinking about it a lot because when we started with the programming, since I programmed for LEHA, which is an LBQ centered organization, and I remember the first time I actually did not hear about non-binary until I think somewhere either late 2018, early 2019, and actually it was because I was having an argument with my friends. We are trying to look at what is non-binary and what is gender non-conforming, because I think when we started the queer or the GNC program in LEHA, we were trying to see an umbrella term we can use to represent all the persons who fall under there. And so yeah, I can say it was late 2018, early 2019. That was the first time I interacted with it and actually got to understand what it meant.
Okay. So when you say LBQ centered, like LEHA is an LBQ centered organization, what does that mean for those of us who took a better memo? Yeah.
Oh, okay. So what I meant is when it comes to the programming and the focus or the target population that we serve, they are lesbian, bisexual, and queer persons. But when we're looking at the queer, we are still trying to debate between queer and non-binary as a term, because also we realize that there's a need to for us to be specific, and so it's because of that we are still trying to see if we can be able to do away with queer, because it's quite ambiguous, and just center it around non-binary. So, but that does not mean that if, for example, you are within the ITGNC community, you cannot be able also to focus to come and access the health services. But specifically for specificities, we deal with lesbian, bisexual, and queer persons.
Okay, thank you for that. So I can also relate to knowing GNC before knowing non-binary. The first time I came across that term, I'm not so sure. Maybe 2016, 2017, thereabout.
Wow.
But even, yeah, you're right. When we started the programming, it used to be gender non-conforming, and now what non-binary is what we used to define as gender non-conforming. Like to conform to either man or woman or whatever. Yeah. So mainly 2016, 2017. Yeah, right. Thereabout. Yeah. So now, what does it mean to you? Like, where we come at Alex, when you're like, I am a non-binary person. What does that mean?
Yeah, I think first it gives me a sense of identity. Like, we usually have these jokes that we're saying that how we don't want to be boxed, but we're still picking the box that, best describes you. And for me, I feel like when it comes to non-binary, it's easy for me to... It gives me a space where I can just express myself, whether it's, gender expression, whether it's how I identify. I feel like the non-binary term gives me more room to do that, other than the rest of the rooms.
Is the rooms
like, for example, saying I'm female, saying I'm male. I feel like there are specific requirements for you to be female or male, or expectations that to me they do not quite make sense. So I feel like let me stay here where it's a let me not really ambiguous, but somewhere that it's not governed by anything. Yeah, so I can't be anything. I have room also to explore more of myself when I am identifying as that, because also that's a term I'm trying to see and wondering, do I really quite fit here, or I can just be Kagendo, and just be that. But for now, I feel like I'm more grounded when I identify as non-binary because of that.
Okay, thank you for that. Also, I feel it's important to then define what non-binary is.
Yeah.
Because I feel even tumezoea kusema hizo watu, we kind of assume everyone knows that.
Yeah.
But very few people in Kenya or even like outside Kenya know issues that non-binary or trans. They just like either upate mtu mwenye ameona kwa TV, but even then it's not so clear, ama anajua mse mwingine mwenye ni non-binary or trans. So non-binary is an umbrella term for all the gender identities that are neither man nor woman. Yeah. So yeah, there are other genders apart from the two that we know, and as we continue the conversation, hopefully we'll get to understand how, like, zimetokea wapi and how come, how do they come to exist. So I don't know, non-binary for me, sometimes I feel like I really have to not really think hard, but there are all these things that affect, I think, how we relate to certain terms. First, there's the society you live in, there's the language that you're afforded. There are all these things, and I don't even believe that the language that we have right now in Atosha could describe everything that a human being can be.
Sure.
So non-binary for me, when I say the Kai is a non-binary person, like in the simplest terms, is that I'm neither man nor woman. But someone will be like, how does that exist?
Yeah.
And that is why it's very important for me every time we have this conversation to bring in the issue of this gender incongruence that happens. And a gender incongruence, now that mismatch between the sex you assigned at birth, now how the gender that how you experience your gender.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people only, when you talk about that, they only think about trans woman, trans man.
Sure.
But I'm like, but then there are also the rest of us that do not really like the sex was assigned, and subsequently the gender that we assigned we do not relate to. Yeah. But also it does not mean that we want to, like, automatically imanishi now I'm a trans man, like I'm not that. So I feel that is something I constantly have to explain. Like, so being non-binary is like the simplest. I do not identify with what I was assigned, but also it does not mean that I identify with the binary man side of it. Niko tu hapo. And where I relate to you is also the freedom that it affords me. I think learning, that's why I love language. I love knowing that there's a word that describes things. Yeah. So learning that, there's non-binary, and non-binary has this definition. For me, it gave me now the freedom to be like, Kumba, there's nothing wrong with me. Kumba, you can just be non-binary and not be anything. You can just be that, basically. Yeah. So there's also like a lot of misconceptions that being non-binary is a trend, like it's a new phenomenon. Like in COVID, tulikuwa tumeboeka, tukashangaa, like what new things? Non-binary is a thing. We should try and make it a thing, right? So what are your thoughts about that?
So my thoughts, first of all, is I like this. Is it an example? Like when we're saying of diversities, like when you look at plants, they have so many diversities. When you look at animals, so many diversities. But when it comes to human beings, it's like we're just limited. It's either you can be male or female, nothing else in between. So for me, I feel like at some point, I'm not saying that whether you do not believe in, I don't even know what is there to believe in the first place. So for me, I'm quite just, I can say it's interesting to hear how people can be very limiting, especially within their thinking. Like, for example, this non-binary is a weird concept that we've never heard of, but you've heard of male, you've heard of female, and you've never asked yourself, like, there's nothing else beyond this, like how you only grew up. For example, I grew up in Karatina, and my whole life just revolves around, I've never maybe wanted to know what is beyond, what's in Nyeri town, what is in Nairobi. So for me, I feel like we like playing, for lack of a better word, we like playing dumb. And so it's evident that there were some languages. I also liked what you said about language. When you have a language, when you can be able to say, for example, I am non-binary, it also now starts shining more light on that. Like, what does that mean? What are some of the needs? How can we support these people and things like that? But for now, we are just in a place where we are debating whether we are people or a plant. So I don't know how I'm supposed to say that, but for me, it's more on the levels of education. Like, educate yourself, because we've grown around this kind of conversations of where, like, in the Kikuyu cultures, where people we used to be told, when you go around the mugumo tree, you change your gender, or you change yourself. If you're a woman, you become a man. If you're a man, you become a woman. But I personally did not think about it like that until I started having conversations with people, and people were like, it's not like you are supposed to go around the mugumo tree and then you magically turned into a guy. It was more also for the community. Like, when you do that, it was more of symbolic. It was supposed to be, now you actually, first of all, you do want to change your gender. And so it was important also for the community to start seeing you as your newly acquired
So you're going
gender.
around, it is them acknowledging, alienda kazunguka, so now this is a new person.
Yeah, but tulikuwa tunagrow tukiambiwa, and when you go around the mugumo tree 7 times, I think it was supposed to be at night, vituka hizo. Now by morning you're supposed to to actually be a guy. And some of us who actually did that were very disappointed, because we were like, what happened? I did not miss the time. I did not miscalculate my So it was more of for the community as well. It was not mainly, yes, it was for you, but it was also a symbol that first, you don't want to change your gender, and so it was important for the community to start seeing you as as with that gender now that you changed. But now it's sad, because some of these stories, well, they're not there. And a good number of, when you're looking at the different cultures, the different societies that exist, not just in Africa, I mean in Kenya, but in Africa, you come to realize each and every person's or each and every society had a term. First of all, it was not written on stone that, there is this is sex, this is gender. Most of when you're looking at the African history, most of the gender and sex was very ambiguous. It was not something that was, it was recognized as more of, let me say, an energy. And so you cannot box an energy. You can't say, this, it's supposed to look like this, it's not supposed to look like anything. It's just supposed to exist. And so I feel like, because of erasure, the erasure that happened, that's where we are here. First of all, trying to prove to people that we exist, and also seeing, like, you see, I have 2 eyes, I can breathe. When you cut me, I have blood, so I am a person. So yeah, I feel like that's where we are a little bit disadvantaged. And so here we are.
And on the issue of gender, and you've talked about language, you've talked about culture, you've talked about erasure. And I feel that is a conversation most of us, like you always say, we need to go back to that conversation when everyone's like, this thing is an African, this thing is new. But there's evidence that people have existed. And I think it's the same article I read, maybe about energies.
Yeah.
And that a lot of indigenous communities had more than just the 2 genders, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which then means it is not a universal concept.
It just
to you and your society. You go to another society and it's a different setting altogether.
True.
And that was what was a thing before colonialism.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people have written about that, like Kama Dr. Sylvia Tamale, right? Now colonialism happens, and then we decide, then the predominant gender system, the gender binary man, woman, Europe side is what is enforced to the rest of the world. Like, after the cultures that had like 5 genders, suddenly it is wrong to have 5 genders. You have to have only 2 genders. Yeah, so actually language is very important. The first thing they do to you is like take away the language, so that when you can't describe it, it's very easy to argue that it does not exist. Yeah. So what are some of the interesting things you've been reading in history? Like I know you're a fan of going back in time. Yeah, so
I think when specifically for this, now since I had to go back, I had forgotten a few, but I had to go back. But I think there is this one, I came to realize that, the existing penal code that is currently in Atusumbua Kichwa A162 AC 165. It was brought in, or it was adopted from Indian Penal Code, literally was it 1864 to Apple. Like someone just took it, akapin into the Kenyan law, and so from that's where actually most of the erasures started. Like, first of all, it was sexualized, when in real sense it was nothing sexual. It was just a community, a people just existed, and acknowledging that yes, we have males, we have females, but also we have this other type of people that might or may not look like this, or maybe they vibrate like this, and so from then everything now started being sexual. When you are an LBQ, fetishization, you're gay, fetishization, but also that's about sexual orientation, which is actually within the community or the society, they are called sexual deviance, like things like that. So when everything now started being negative and negative and negative, also we started rejecting it, because we're like, what? Yani, we've just been existing here and kumbe we are savages. So we had to start being modern, and some of this modernization looked like that. And so I do not know if other places in the other countries within Africa did adopt the same law, but I know for a fact that colonization also did a number on them. Like, for example, I was reading on, she was called Victoria. I think she was a trans woman from Zimbabwe, or I am not sure about that, but you can see actually her story from the time she identified herself all the way to now, where she had to be subjected to some, really humiliating tests and things like that. And now the government being like, no, you lied. You said you're a woman and you can be able to prove it, because that's what she had said. Like, I have my organs, I can be able to prove it. But now, when someone does that evasion, like they evade your privacy, so you cannot be able now to control. And so because of that, she was jailed under some sodomy rule or something like that. But that's one of the many stories. Like, we have so many people from South Africa, from Uganda, but all these stories revolve around that, around, again, sexualization. Like, you cannot be able to look, for example, you cannot be a woman according to the society. Me looking at you, you're a woman, but you cannot be able to say you're non-binary. Like, what's that? Like, how can you be something that it's not there? But looking again at the history has taught us that people like me, people like you, the non-binary people, they used to exist. It was not about what you wear, like you wear men-like, and so you're non-binary. It was more of energies. There are some stories that are being told within the cultures where the gender was not assigned to a child until a certain age. At times it was 5 years, at times it was after puberty or during puberty, but it was not assigned at birth, because, well, it's hard for you to tell a gender of a person when, at birth. So if we can have a system that allows us to maybe to choose our genders when I think we're 18, when you're taking your ID, you go like, that gender marker that's always like FM, you're able to go and be like, well, can it be NB or can it be just XXX? So yeah, those are some of the things that I've been reading and getting very angry that this is not information that's just readily available for Inje.
Well, that's interesting, but you've mentioned something about we existed, but also, okay, I want to throw expand into the works, right? Because, like we said, like gender is a social construct. So most likely, it's usually in a society, ideally, that come up with the rules of gender up until Christianity and colonialism. It's the gender binary where there are only two genders, right? So someone might argue, argument. I think, what if I come from the low community, maybe kwa can call only two genders. How can you be non-binary then if in your community there can only be two?
Now, for me, I think I would also ask them, like, how are you sure it used to be two? Because looking at the current days or the current times that we are in this 21st century, we have people like you who literally are your ancestors' child. So, meaning it may not have been people within your family, but just maybe. Because, first of all, we are recognizing that the language was erased. So when you're saying or when you're arguing that, also, where are you coming from? Like, have you done your research, or have you just been looking around and be like, male and these are females, so we cannot have people like you? Because also, again, there's a lot of policing, like, what do you call the social profiling? Like, go back and actually look at it. Like, you argue they were true, but can you present it? Can you actually be able to state that, not looking at, not coming from a place of bias as well? Like, how well can you be able to quantify whatever you're saying?
I don't know if you've seen that. It's one of my favorite TikTok videos. I've forgotten his second name. It's called Neil. He's a scientist from America, and they were having this conversation with Ben Shapiro. That I don't know if you also know that person. You can Google. Anyway, Ben Shapiro is this media personality, like a right-wing conservative, whatever, who's like very anti-trans. So I want to argue that Neil, like, this transgender thing is becoming a phenomenon. They do not exist. But then Neil is like, okay, we could sit here and debate whether they are men or women. But the fact that there exists an individual, whether we have a name for the individual or not, who does not fit neatly into your boxes, should be a reason for you to carry out research and find out how do they exist, instead of arguing against their existence. So clearly, who's the fool, right? And also when it comes now to no sexualization, like it's funny how it always comes back, but but what parts do you have? And that's why I also like the literature around it. It's about energies. And so actually my counter argument is that the fact that I exist now is enough evidence that non-binary people are a thing.
Yeah, or
right?
even existed, true.
And on the subject of, I like it when, I don't like it, it's funny when people, like, it's an African that this thing is an African. I'm like, but you're arguing with me with, like, Christianity. And no, like, you can be Christian all you want, it's fine. But they literally came and told you that, going back to what I said earlier, like, different societies had different gender systems.
Yeah.
So they came and they're like, no, your gender system that recognizes 5 genders is demonic. Hii yetu yenye iko na wawili ndio ina make sense. So years later, when this conversation comes up, you're like, no, it's demonic. And then you now take it's an Christian to mean it's an African. So when you tell me actually it's an African, what you're telling me is that it's an Christian, according to your religion. So actually, yeah. Also, on the Africanness of it, I was reading about there's a tribe in Mexico. They have a third gender called Mushi. Is it in Chile or where? I'll remember as we continue. And it was very interesting, and even earlier we were talking about the Hijra, the fact that it was so part, like, gender diverse people, non-binary people, trans people are so much part of culture. And again, I'm not saying African culture, like, we're not talking African culture, but I do not mean that every African culture recognizes this. Like I said, gender is very particular. Gender systems are very particular to the society in which they were created. But the argument was, it was so African, or maybe they were so part of their cultures that they were not considered other. Like, you see how Western Christianity, Yamasai, out my LGBTQ, in that culture, they're like, hawako LGBT, walikuwa tunajua nani ni wa hii gender, nani ni one of us. So they were not, like, after some communities that now we would consider transgender, non-binary, in that community, they were not called that because they were already part of that community. They had their own naming in that community. They had their own pronouns in that community. Yeah, so, like, I really hope when people are arguing that it's an African, they would go back and be like, hey, by the jina ilikuwa inamaanisha, like,
yeah, but also when you're looking at some of the extreme measures, because now we are talking about something that is also subjected to punishment, right? But also, to me, it was really, really scary to also note that there was this time that there was a conversation also that was happening during the last time the repeal was happening, and one of the judges was arguing like, in our culture, that was the Kikuyu culture now, we had a way of dealing with these people. And he was actually, at it and showing us how we're supposed to be punished, But actually, I went back and I was like, okay, there was punishment, but what was it? And it was murder. So I'm like, so we're actually telling people that, so this is also the conversation that actually came up with a lot of, politician and, our dear religious persons, and not just Christianity, it spread all the way. And they also, what is his name? This guy from Mombasa was very vocal and say, yes, who was saying how we should be killed and things like that. But my mind went there because I'm like, if back then we were still being killed, for who we are, isn't it time for us we have progressive rules and progressive, laws that actually protect people? So I feel like when we're bringing these conversations about gender, we can also literally just have sex conversations, because one of the things that actually I was even looking at actually all the policies that the bills that are actually in court, in parliament, the protection bill, family protection bill, the Linda Jamie, everything is talking about sex, but no one actually is wanna go there.
Ourselves are not talking about sex.
Inakaa ile katuni ya
Like, if
crude.
anything, you are the ones who are obsessed with
Man, that's we don't even hata hatutaki, like in case of anything we just want to not even queer rights, because what's queer rights? We just want human rights, like to just survive. For me to be able to know that if my partner is abusive, I can go to the police and actually just report. Not on the basis of my partner who is a woman, is violating me, a non-binary person, and now the police start asking you, a non-binary person is in vitu gani, and then you have to go. First of all, you're traumatized, and now you have to stop being traumatized and start schooling, and to me, it's very unfair. It's very unfair because when we're screaming about punishment, what have I done wrong actually for me to deserve a punishment? Because we need to get this topic out of the bedroom and actually have sex conversations that are illuminated. When we're having these conversations, we are also coming up with terms. Like, for example, there's someone maybe who didn't know there's a difference between non-binary and GNC, or gender non-conforming. And with that, they're able now to maybe clearly articulate themselves. But now, how is this non-binary, trans, all these terms that we are using in the programming, how can we be able to break them down to maybe our vernaculars, like a language that all of us maybe are talking, like if it's Swahili, it's something that's standard, and it's also not coming from a place of, again, bias.
Firstly, I think it's intentional that they do that sometimes, like make it about sex and parts. A lot of people have written about it, and I cannot remember the specific person who said this. But if you want to dehumanize a person, like pick one thing about them and make it the only thing about them. So that, okay, fikiria juu ya Kagendo, fikiria to sex. Okay, like, so that you can never just see Kagendo as a human being. Like, this is a human being who deserves rights. This is a human being that's a taxpayer. This is a human being that helps, like, contributes to the development of this country. So I feel like it's part of the anti-rights propaganda to make it about one thing and one thing only. So that your conversation is moved. Yeah. You're always just stuck there educating people about the same thing, And on the issue of language, I'm glad you brought it up because it's important to also recognize that the language that we even use to describe ourselves right now, like it's at a CA true, right? Tuliletewa. So when people say non-binary is a new phenomenon, it's a trend, I'm like, the term non-binary is the new thing. Yeah. But the people have always been there. But that is what happens when erasure happens. Now the only words that we are accorded, those are English. Now we have difficulty translating them into vernacular. True. And now people use that to argue, so no, nakuna kwa vernacular, so you did exist. I'm like, no, like you have to go back in history and see why things started going wrong. But also you've talked about inventing words. And I think as a community, that is one of the most powerful, like one of the ways you could reclaim power. Yeah. That there isn't a word for that. So we'll come up with a word for it. Like even words like non-binary, gender queer, it's people on platforms come a Tumblr who came up with that. Like, there's no word for us, let's come up with it. So I don't see how, like, as non-binary people in Kenya, we can as well invent those words.
Yeah, because actually language is very important, because you have some journalists and content creators like akina King Kalala who are like, hey, when I was growing up, I didn't have, akukuwa na hizi vitu za madai them. But in real sense, even if I was growing with you, I could not have identified myself as they, them, because, well, there's no language for me. So you cannot start coming for me right now when I actually have the language, And so, yeah, I actually think that the ones who are actually beating us a lot, the journalists, the content creators, the politicians, the religious leaders, all of them are coming for us because of that just one language. Like, we do not have things within our native languages or mother tongues that we could be able to kujitetea nazo. In case of anything, ni order tuletea Western propaganda. As we are just fine huku, meeting up, hanging up kwa Uhuru Park, eating snacks and just venting about the economy ni mbaya, things like that. Because when you have very small information, it also becomes very dangerous and very poisonous. Because first of all, you're someone with a mic. You have a platform. You can be able to literally speak with that megaphone, a microphone, such that inasikika all the way in the Western countries, in Europe. But what are you actually passing? You're just telling these people, actually, vile mlikuja mkakolonize, you did a really good job. Because in real sense, we are just killing our people. In case of anything, we don't even want to listen to them. Because right now you try to even have a conversation about gender identity, no one is going to listen, because they're like, but singing you are part of the LGBTQ. But you're like, that has nothing to do with that. Maybe for the sake of the programming, yes, but we are talking about something entirely different. Once you're telling this child that you cannot have comprehensive sexual reproductive health education, how are you helping this kid? In case of anything, one of the things that actually traumatized me in this country is how high the teenage pregnancy is. And the fact that is a non-issue. Like, it's nothing. When you're looking at your SRHR, watoi, the comprehensive education, no one talks about the very important things. Like, watu wako huko, do not give my child condom, but your kid is having sex. Some of the earlier interactions of languages that I came across when growing up was something like tomboy. But I was like, now looking back, I'm like, you had a term for that. Why didn't you have a term for this? Because when I'm looking at that, it was more of expression. But what about the identities? Like, no one would have, kunituka kulikuwa na hiyo wanja kihe, but still ilikuwa tu tomboy. But I was like, there's a name, there's a term for, like girls who behave a peculiar way, a certain way in the community. But what about people who do not identify as girls? People who do not identify as boys? Like, what are they called? Because also the terms that exist, they are abusive terms. Like, we didn't have a life then, but I'm like, well, I'm here now, so yeah, we can be able to coin some of these words. If not, we can reclaim them.
I'm sure there are words somewhere hidden in books on shelves.
Yeah, treasure hunt 101.
Yeah, we should do that. But circling back to what you said about how people are being treated, let me tell you a point, Ajay. They were being killed, and I liked what you said, that adopting progressive values, but also maybe it was just your community was killing people, another community was celebrating them. So wouldn't you rather go with the one that in our farm all human beings?
True.
Right?
Yeah.
Or rather, you created that culture. I don't know why people like acting like culture is this thing you can't change. I mean, you've evolved. Paka Christianity squeezy is similar to being African. You might as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then again, I feel when people are comfortable in their privilege, it's very easy for them to be like, hey, why should we do?
It does not bother me.
It does not bother me. But maybe sticking around, leo ni mimi, kesho ni wewe. And
the fact that wakinikujia, you are very silent. When they are coming for you, I'm going to be silent, and then all of us were just.
Or maybe I want to be there because I'm gone.
Yeah, so utakuwa tena mtu wa kukutetea because everyone is like, okay.
The frequently asked question that we were working on today is that, is being non-binary a recent phenomenon?
Yeah, something new.
Something new. so debunk it. Ukiambiwa to like, if someone asks you that, what's the one statement utampea?
I can just be like, patriarchy, religion, they're very westernized. Non-binary is very African, just that we do not have time for it, but it's very, very African, and not actually the term, but more of the individuals under that term. Because if you choose to be oblivious with the things that are happening, who knows, like, who says your offspring is not going to be queer? Like, and how are you going to be the very nurturing, caring parent if you cannot be able to actually read, like read and actually understand the concept? So how are you going to be the person who is leading a whole generation and you cannot be able, like, you do not even care for them? Because at this point, if you're not a human rights activist, mimi sijui what you're doing, especially sahi in Kenya, because
trying to survive.
You cannot be able to speak up for you cannot be able to speak up for someone else, meaning you are going to be the one who's oppressed kesho.
I'd also respond in more or less the same way. We're like, the term is new, but the people have always existed, just under different names, different titles, different things, and language definitely evolves.
True.
Yeah, so we have to catch up.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, me
Hopefully
too.
we'll be able to delve deeper into the history as we continue. Yeah, so thank you for joining us. After all has been said and done, cheers.
Yeah.
Say goodbye to the audience. Bye.
Bye.